Tony Abate here with Ross Mortgage. Let's talk a little bit about 2-1 temporary buy-down mortgages. Over the last year, this has kind of been a buzzword in the industry. A lot of folks talk about this as a great solution to the fact that we've been in a rising interest rate market. And I want to break this down a little bit and talk about, is this really a good choice for a home buyer? Are there better alternatives? What are the advantages and disadvantages? So let's dive in and talk about how this 2-1 temporary buy-down works. So let's take our hypothetical buyer. Let's say they're purchasing a home and this buyer needs a mortgage for $250,000. If he just took a regular plain old vanilla 30-year fixed rate loan, as we sit here at the end of November 2023, interest rate might be about 7%. Okay, so on that $250,000 loan at 7%, he'd have a monthly payment of $1,664, and that's where that loan payment would stay for the whole life of the 30-year loan. So pretty uneventful. So let's say that home buyer though says, hey, I've been hearing about this 2-1 temporary buy down. How does it work? Is it going to be good for me? Is it bad? Give us the details. So a 2-1 temporary buy down simply means that for the first 2 years of the loan, the interest rate is discounted. How much? Well, on that 7% loan, for the first year, for the first 12 months, that home buyer would have an interest rate of 5%. And the monthly payment at 5% would be $1,342, which is savings of $321 a month. That's pretty measurable. In the second year, the interest rate is 6%, and the monthly payment at that 6% rate would be $1,499. Saves $164 a month compared to the 7% payment. And then in the third year, going forward, that home buyer is at that 7% rate, and that stays for the duration of the loan. So year 1 at 5%, year 2 at 6%, years 3 through 30 at 7%. That's the 2-1 temporary buy down. Now, of course, that's not free, right? I mean, that money has to come from some place to subsidize the fact that interest rate is discounted. So if we add up that savings over those first 2 years, the total in our case is $5,827. When a buy down is used in a purchase, a temporary buy down, that money has to come from the seller. Quite frankly, it wouldn't make much sense if the buyer paid it anyway. They just kind of be prepaying their very own loan, so why would they do that? So a person has to negotiate with the seller, look, I want you to pay this $5,827 towards my loan costs, and I'm going to use that money to get that 2-1 temporary buy down. Is that a good choice? Well, certainly for the first couple of years, the buyer is going to save some measurable money, and he's doing so at the expense of the seller. The seller agreed to pay that through the negotiation. Maybe the offer price was right, whatever the case may be. So is this a good way to go? To me, the answer to that question lies in this. We've got $5,827 coming from this seller. What's the best use of the money? What can we use that money for to put it to best use, get the best bang for the buck? Kind of depends on what's important for this buyer, okay? So let's look at another option. Let's go back to that plain old vanilla 30-year fixed rate loan. Well, you could use that same money from the seller and just buy regular old discount points to permanently buy down the interest rate on the loan. Okay, that's pretty commonplace when you hear somebody get a quote of this percentage rate and they're paying 2 points. That's the points that we're talking about. So how would that change things if they stepped away from the temporary buy down and used that money on just a standard 30-year fixed? Well, $5,827 is a little over 2 points mathematically on a $250,000 loan. It would probably buy that rate down from 7% down to maybe 6 3/8%. But for the sake of this example, let's use 6.5%. Let's be conservative with our analysis on that, okay? So we take that same seller concession that the seller agreed to pay, the $5,827, and the buyer says, well, I don't want a temporary buy down, I want a permanent buy down. So what happens? Well, the rate is brought down to, in our example here, 6.5%, not as deep as the 5% like in the temporary buy down, but it's permanent. So is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Well, over 30 years, clearly the permanent buy down where the rate would stay at that reduced amount for the whole term of the loan, that's the better choice. There's no question about that. It's not always realistic to look at that way. Home buyers have life events that cause them to sell a home, refinance a home, some opportunity to pay off the loan. Things usually interrupt that 30-year cycle. So let's do some analysis. If we go back to our 2-1 buy down, if we add up all the payments, let's say over a 10-year period, so it's discounted in the first year at 5%, discounted in the second year to 6%, and then years 3 through 30, it's at the 7%. In 10 years, the total payments total about $193,764. I'm reading my cheat sheet here, okay? So that's the grand total of 10 years worth of house payments in that 2-1 buy down example. Well, if we compare that to the permanent buy down with a rate of 6.5%, 10 years of payments at 6.5% would come to $189,620. So even though the rate was not as deeply discounted for those first 2 years of the loan, the fact that it's permanent, 6.5% over the life of the loan, ends up being a greater savings over the long haul. Okay, so in short, the longer a person is going to have the loan, the greater benefit there is to doing the permanent buy down instead of the temporary buy down. We don't always have that crystal ball to know how long we're going to be in a home or how long we're going to be in a loan, so there's some guesswork involved, but those are the mechanics behind the temporary buy down versus a permanent buy down. So who is a good candidate for this 2-1 buy down? Well, somebody who really has a need to have lower payments early in the loan. Maybe they're early in their career path and they know that in the next few years they're going to see some substantial raises. Well, in that case, having a lower payment for those first couple of years of the loan can make it a little more manageable for that individual. If a person knows that their term of home ownership is going to be relatively short, or if maybe they're predicting that rates are going to go down and they can refinance out of that temporary buy down loan, that would be another individual that could benefit from the 2-1 buy down loan. Okay, so what are some disadvantages? Well, first off, that money has to come from the seller. So you need a cooperative seller to pay the cost of that 2-1 temporary buy down. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. That's the negotiation that happens between a buyer and the seller with the help of their agents. The other thing is that over the long haul, like we said a moment ago, your total payments are going to be greater than if you use that money to buy down the rate permanently. So that's something to consider as well. I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to this page. It would help me a lot. And remember, getting a mortgage does not have to be hard.